the enormous all-out Russian invasion of Ukraine, the attention and focus of each have been highly distracted from Syria. Finland and Sweden each applied to finally join the NATO alliance in the face of the war in Ukraine, but their memberships have to be approved by every single other member already in NATO, and Turkey has been deliberately stalling on giving out that approval. Turkey is currently demanding that Sweden and Finland each extradite accused PKK members in their countries back to Turkey to stand trial, and that Finland end their ongoing arms embargo on Turkey, which they implemented years ago over concerns that the Turks were using those weapons in Syria against civilian targets. In exchange for meeting these demands, Turkey has agreed to accept their applications into NATO. But with a new Turkish ground invasion into northern Syria looming against the nominally US-allied Kurdish SDF, the United States will most likely not want to do anything to provoke Turkey's wrath any further that could lead them to further blocking Sweden and Finland's memberships into NATO, or pushing the Turks even further into the orbit of Moscow. There was already an intense spat back in 2017 when the Turks agreed to purchase the Russian-made S-400 air defense system, which led to economic sanctions being slapped upon Turkey by their own NATO ally, the United States. Thus, it is likely that if and when Turkey does initiate this invasion, the United States will probably choose to abandon their Kurdish allies and throw them under the bus in exchange for getting the Turks on board with letting Sweden and Finland into NATO in order to further counter the Russians in Northern Europe. Turkey is well aware of this complicated geopolitical calculus, and therefore knows that this is their best opportunity to seize what they want in northern Syria. Now, the other big international player in the Syrian civil war besides the United States has historically been the Russians. Initially, Russia and Turkey's geopolitical interests in the civil war clashed because Turkey wanted Assad to step down from power and Russia wanted him to remain in power at all costs. You see, Russia has a vital interest in keeping the Assad regime in power in Syria because it is his regime that grants the Russian Navy their access and lease over the port here at Tartus, the only operational base that the Russian Navy is able to use on the Mediterranean Sea. This is critical because it spares Russian warships operating in the Mediterranean the necessity of having to sail back through the narrow NATO-controlled choke points of the Turkish Straits to reach Russia's own ports on the north side of the Black Sea whenever they need replenishments or repairs. Tartus therefore enables the Russian Navy to operate within the Mediterranean independently of Russia's own bases on the Black Sea coast, which could always be theoretically bottled up and contained there by NATO closing down the Turkish Straits. Without Tartus, the Russian Navy would no longer be capable of functioning in the Mediterranean with a base to repair and replenish itself at during a war with NATO. And that is why the Russians want to keep Assad in power. If Assad was ever toppled, there would never be any guarantee to the Russians that whatever new regime replaces him would renew their lease to the port at Tartus. And that could mean their entire Mediterranean strategy against NATO could just always go up in smoke. So the Russians began to massively support the Assad regime's forces with airstrikes against rebel factions beginning in 2015.